Hello and welcome back to my world of stuff. In this particular video, this will hopefully be of interest to Doctor Who fans. I know Doctor Who videos always seem to do well, and although this isn't a dedicated Doctor Who channel, I am a fan of Doctor Who and I do pick up bits of merchandise and I like to talk about them when I do. The merchandise I'm talking about today will be of interest to fans of Doctor Who in the print media. It's the latest batch of 4 books released by the BBC under the old Target book banner. Brief history, of course, although I know I'm preaching to the converted in terms of Doctor Who fans. The Target book range were enormously popular in the 1970s, in the years before VHS, long before DVD, Blu-ray and streaming. The only way Doctor Who fans could experience old Doctor Who adventures was by way of the Doctor Who Target books, which began in earnest in 1973. Target initially republished the 3 Doctor Who books which came out in the 60s. Doctor Who in an Exciting Adventure with the Daleks, Doctor Who and the Crusaders, and Doctor Who and the Zabi. Those were the only Doctor Who books published in the 60s, which is quite amazing really when you consider how popular the series was at the time. But in the 70s, I think it was, certainly an imprint called Target Books. I can't remember the name of the broader publisher at the time. They were looking for a new imprint of children's books. And the editor, I think his name is Richard Henwood, came across these 3 old Doctor Who books, negotiated the rights, republished them, and they were a massive success, which then led to the idea to novelise other Doctor Who stories, which involved the current production team of the series, which was largely Terence Dicks, who was the show's script editor, and writers like Malcolm Hulke. And thus began a bit of a publishing legend. And this was the way that us older Doctor Who fans who had either not seen these early episodes or had seen them and long since forgotten them, could experience them again in these very handy little pocket-sized paperback books. It was an imprint which ran well into the 80s, possibly actually into the 90s, come to think of it. And then it mutated into the new adventures when Doctor Who itself finished. So that's a potted history of the Target books, and of course they are something which fans cherish. Quick confession coming up, I had a whole collection of the entire book series, and I disposed of them all at a science fiction convention in Cardiff about 1990, when I felt I sort of didn't really want them anymore. I've since started collecting some of them again. I pick up the old one here, and I haven't got a full set by any means, but I've got a couple of healthy shelves full of them now. And a few years ago, BBC Books republished some of those books with their original covers, with new introductory forewords by current Doctor Who alumni, and apparently they did very well. And since then, they've gone on a little publishing spree of new books, adaptations of modern Doctor Who stories, or something I didn't think would ever be done. In this day and age, I thought, well, you've got a 45-minute TV episode. How do you expand that up to a 150, 160-page book? And why would you want to do it? With the advent of DVDs and Blu-rays and stuff, you've got the episodes on the shelf. Why would you want to read them? Well, the reason is because the writers are given the chance now to add to their stories and embellish upon their stories, and perhaps reintroduce excised material or tell their stories in slightly different ways. One of the first batches which came out, and still probably my favourite of this new run of series books, was Rose by Russell T Davies, which came out as the first batch a few years back. And he did add a lot of extra material, stuff which had been left out, stuff that they didn't have the budget to film at the time. And it's a terrific retelling of what is still, I think, one of the most important Doctor Who stories, because I had to relaunch the series to an audience that had forgotten it or wasn't even familiar with it. So the trend, the tradition is carrying on. We're not getting the books on a monthly basis like we used to, but we're getting them in little batches every year to 18 months or so. And this latest batch came out last month, and I have, because I'm a good diligent boy, read them all. And now I'm just going to give you a quick run through them. If you haven't picked them up yet, which ones you might want to give priority to, which ones you might want to skip. The first thing I will say is that they're all good books in their own right. They all read very well, they're written very well, with a lot of care and attention to good writing and good storytelling. Now, I'm going to talk about them in the order I read them. The first one I picked up was The Fires of Pompeii by James Moran. This was based, of course, on the second story from the 4th series of Doctor Who, New Doctor Who, when Catherine Tate came on board the TARDIS as the returning Donna, with David Tennant, of course, as the Doctor. There he is on the back. This is the story where the Doctor takes Donna on her first historical jaunt, plans to take her to Rome. They end up in Pompeii on Volcano Day, and they become involved in the machinations of the mysterious Sisters of the Sibylline and strange lava-like creatures called the Pyroville, who are stranded beneath Vesuvius and may well have something to do with its eruption. It's interesting, really, because the Pompeii thing is one of the great tragedies of humankind, I suppose, in the human era, and sort of revisiting it and putting a science fiction spin on it could seem to be in slightly bad taste because, of course, thousands of people died there. But this book actually, and in fact the story on TV, handles it quite sympathetically, because the Doctor makes it quite clear that the Pompeii eruption in AD 79 is a fixed point in time. It's not something he can change. And this has always been sort of a bone of contention in Doctor Who. The Doctor always says, I can't interfere. But of course, that's all he ever does, everywhere he goes. The very fact of his presence changes the timeline of wherever he is. But new Doctor Who has created this idea of the fixed point in time where something is so huge that it can't be changed because it will have a massive impact on the timeline. It's a sort of a tenuous sort of thing, which probably falls apart if you look at it too closely. But it does help get out of a huge tight narrative corner sometimes. In terms of the book then, I really enjoyed this. I read it very quickly. It's an easy read. It's one of the longer books, actually. It's 174 pages, 171 pages. But it rattles along. I mean, it very closely resembles the story. There's added character detail, a bit more background to certain characters, which is what these books give the writers the opportunity to do. The Doctor and Donna's relationship is very well portrayed. I think Donna in this is much feistier than I remembered her being from the episode. She sort of questions the Doctor a lot, and she's not in awe of him. And that was the thing that they did with Donna. In the new series, of course, we'd had Rose, who was in awe of the Doctor, who was in love with him, and he was probably in love with her. Then we had Martha, who fancied the Doctor, but he didn't reciprocate because of the Rose situation. This was a situation where the Doctor was accompanied by somebody who just wanted to travel, explore the universe, and be a friend. But she's older, she's a more mature woman. She doesn't put up with the Doctor's nonsense, and she calls him out a lot of times on a lot of things. That's an interesting dynamic. Some people might find it a little bit wearing because she's constantly nagging and constantly wearing at him. But as we know throughout the season, as a character, she softened on screen and she became a more seasoned traveller. But this in itself is a very good book, very highly recommended. It's a really good read. It's written by James Moran, who is an underrated screenwriter. I think he's written a few TV bits and pieces, Torchwood and so on, and a very good film called Cockneys versus Zombies, which came out 10 years ago now. I'm terrified to realise. But it's a nice, well-written book, and I know that James Moran took very carefully the responsibility of adding to the target range, and he's done a very good job of turning his story into a rip-roaring read. I mean, you'll sit down, most of these books I sat and read in a day because I've just been sitting in the garden, just flashing through them, and they're good, solid reads. And I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10. The next two books are both slightly unusual in that they've already been novelised. And they are, as you may well know, The Stones of Blood and The Androids of Tara from Doctor Who Season 16, which was the Key to Time season in 1978-79. These were previously novelised by Terrance Dicks. And here they are. But as you can see, they're rather slim paper books, which came out in 1980, I think originally, 1980, and Androids of Tara was... Yeah, both came out in 1980. This is the time when Terrance Dicks was writing most of these books. They run to about 120 odd pages, and they're very sort of almost cursory, perfunctory rattles through the story as seen on TV. Terrance, bless him, didn't really have the time to add much to the stories. We just told them as they were on screen. Both decent books, both very readable, but because they're not written by the original author, you know that there's a better book in there somewhere. So a few years back, BBC Audio asked David Fisher, who is sadly no longer with us, the original writer of these stories, to do new novelizations, which would then be released as audiobooks, which duly came out, and I believe were very popular, very good. The decision was then taken to turn those audio script audio novelization scripts into actual novels. So thus we have The Stones of Blood and The Androids of Tara by David Fisher. Now, I think that they've obviously been edited and tidied up, and I think his son has been involved in adapting them into the novels. But I believe that they're pretty much as written by David Fisher, with just a few touches to make them adapt more smoothly to the new format. I read, in fact, if you look at the books, there's a slight difference in size of the two of them. I read Stones of Blood first. This is this is actually the longest of all the new books. It's nearly 200 pages. This is based on story 3 in the Key to Time sequence in season 16, where the Doctor and Romana land on Earth, in modern day Earth, to find the third segment of the Key to Time in amongst a circle of ominous stones, which they find on a remote moorland. It involves all those Doctor Who staples like cultists and strange creatures, and obviously there's an alien presence, an alien spaceship. Again, it's very, very well written. I mean, it keeps to the line of the story, as these things always should, but he adds a lot of detail again to the background characters like Miss Rumford and Vivian Fay, even Mr. De Vries, who's the cultist that we only meet in the first episode, I believe, or possibly into the second of the original story. We get to know more about them as people, and there's a lot more detail about the whole background of the story, and he's really taken his time to flesh things out, and to make it a proper book rather than the rather thin effort that we've had previously. It's a very good book, very readable again. The only criticism I'd make of the book is the one I'd make of the story itself. I love the first 2 episodes. I like the contemporary sort of stuff, the modern day Earth stuff, and it's quite creepy with the augury, blood-sucking stones that are wandering around the place. The only problem is it's a story of 2 halves, because, as you know, the second half sees the introduction of the hyperspace spaceship with the Megara, the Justice Machines, and that all seems a bit sort of tagged on, as if there wasn't enough story to fill 4 episodes. And it creates 2 different types of story. One a science fiction thing, and one a creepy sort of tame horror story. And you still get that impression from the book, unfortunately, which you're bound to do. But it works because it's interesting to see the added detail, and that's the main thing in these books. You get more for your money in terms of character and story. Same is equally true of the new version of Androids of Tara. Now, this is interesting because, as I say, it's a slimmer book. It's 150 odd pages. This is a story. This is the 4th story in the Key to Time sequence, where the Doctor and Romana land on the planet Tara, which is a sort of a medieval society with castles and knights on horseback and electric swords and things. And it is, as most people know, a sort of a Doctor Who version of Anthony Hope's Prisoner of Zenda. But with that science fiction twist, there's doppelgangers and doubles and robots and androids and lots of sort of historical drama stuff. Despite the fact it's a shorter book than Stones of Blood, there is equally a lot of detail in here. Now, on the TV episodes, Tara was this planet. You didn't really get to know much about it. It was just this, it all happened in one location. But here, David Fisher's gone to the trouble of actually explaining the history of Tara and how android culture became a dominant force. And you feel that it's a more rounded society because you get to know a bit about the history of it, and the villain, Count Grendel of Grach, the history of him and his rather misogynistic family. In fact, there's quite a misogynistic tone to the book, in fact, the way that Count Grendel talks to and about women. I think it's people might find it problematic, but it's in the nature of the story, it's in the nature of the character. But it's actually a very good read. It's again, it just flies along, and all the extra stuff is very much appreciated. It's it's just a very good book, a very good read. I didn't give the rating for Stones of Blood. That gets an 8. This also gets an 8. So it's a pretty good batting average so far. So that's the Androids of Tara. The 3rd book, which I finished reading just on the weekend, 4th book rather, is by Rona Munro. It's called The Eaters of Light. This is based on a story from season 10. Season 10, Peter Capaldi's 3rd and final season, and it's the penultimate story from that season. This is a story that sort of came and went at the time, and I don't think it's very well regarded, and I actually looked at the story again halfway through reading the book because the book piqued my interest. It's actually not a bad story. It's very well shot, it has nice bleak cinematography to it, but there's a lot crammed into it, And Rona Munro's taken the opportunity to, again, expand on the backstory of lots of the characters, the situations, and changed a lot of the dialogue and the whole flow of the story, really. Rona Munro, of course, wrote the last story in the original Doctor Who series, that was called Survival. I've managed to reclaim the paperback of that. This was the very last story from 1989. This is the one with the cats on horseback, you'll remember. Probably one of the better stories of the Sylvester McCoy era. Unfortunately, poor Rona has not been very well served by her association with Doctor Who, because that was the last original Doctor Who story, and this, when it was transmitted, was the lowest rated Doctor Who story of the modern era. The book really rehabilitates the story. It is the most literary of these four new books. It reads like a novel, and the others read like novels, but this feels like a literary novel, a bit more literary. She's obviously done her research into Rome and the Legionnaires and the Picts and so on. The story is that the Doctor and Bill, his companion, have been arguing about what happened to the 9th Legion in the Roman Empire, that mysteriously, and this is historically fact, they disappeared in the 2nd century and no one really knows what happened to them. I think there have been lots of films and books and things that have come up with science fiction ideas. This is Doctor Who's view of it, and it's actually very clever, very good story that wasn't served well enough on TV, I think, unfortunately. It turns out that a group of primitive Picts, if you like, in Scotland, are guarding a huge cairn, at the bottom of which, at the end of which, is a gateway to another dimension, through which comes a creature, an eater of light. It's a thing which devours the essence of people and even light itself. And these things only come through occasionally, and they can be fought back by Picts with certain pieces of weaponry. But one of them is through, it's loose, it's destroyed the 9th Legion, which explains what happened to the 9th Legion. There are a few survivors hiding in a cave that Bill meets up with, and eventually they're all reunited, and the Doctor realises they have to fight back this creature, send it back to its dark dimension, and the gateway sealed up to stop any more of these creatures coming through. It's a very, very good book. It's very well written. There's a lot of really interesting detail about those background characters. Again, the Roman legionnaires who survived, you get to know a bit more about how they got where they were. One particular character, I think his name is Sextus, who's a young lad who abandons his family's farming business and then goes to join. And you get a bit more about the background of how he came together. It deals with issues of his sexuality, which was sort of hinted at very quickly in the TV episode. And you also get some nice stuff about the Picts themselves, how they chose the chosen one who guards the gate. So there's a lot more stuff. And the whole introduction to the book is quite different, really, when the Doctor and Bill are separated. Bill has a much more extravagant adventure before she ends up in the cave and meets the Legionnaires, where she gets into a battle with a bull and she falls into the water and tries to swim away. Presumably all that was outside the budget of the TV version, but it's reinstated here, and it makes for a much more thrilling read. The only problem with the book, and this is the problem that I think was inherent in Doctor Who on TV at the time, this might not make me popular with Doctor Who fans, but hey, I'm used to that. In the book, the Doctor comes across as absolutely insufferable. And this was something which did tend to be the case with Peter Capaldi's interpretation of the Doctor. He was very grumpy, he was very sarcastic, snarky, arrogant, and quite unlikable. And that's really exacerbated in this book, because practically every line of dialogue he utters is some sarcastic put down of somebody, an insult, him showing off how much more he knows and how much more experienced it is. And he just comes across as incredibly unlikable, which is a shame. And I've always thought that's a shame, because I think Peter Capaldi is a fantastic actor. I think he's very badly served in his time in Doctor Who. And this book, much as it rehabilitates the story, you do feel that the Doctor is an unlikable presence all the way through it. Even though he's ostensibly the hero, you sort of think, well, if I was with the Doctor, I would be really irritated by him, and I wouldn't want to be with him. I wouldn't want to travel with him, because he's constantly snarky and unpleasant to people. And I don't think that's what the Doctor should be. And I think that ultimately Doctor Who hit the skids during this era, because people didn't want an older Doctor. And not only that, they didn't want an older Doctor who was that miserable all the time. And it did affect the ratings, and the show did suffer. However, I'm going off the point a bit. This is a very, very good book. This gets, I'm going to give this a 9 out of 10, because it's good as the other books are. This feels like an independent novel, whereas these feel like extremely good novelizations. This is a book that would stand on its own 2 feet as a work of literature rather than just a novelization of a TV episode. It's sort of both, obviously, but it feels more like a proper book, if you get my meaning. And I said it gets 9 out of 10. Right, that's my little run through of the new Target novelizations. Hope you found it interesting and enlightening. It might even help you decide which of the books to pick up if you're thinking of getting them. It's difficult times at the moment, and perhaps your budget doesn't stretch to buying them all. I bought them separate times. I didn't buy them all in one batch. I bought one, then I bought two, and then I bought the last one. You might want to do the same because they're freely available on Amazon, and I don't know if they can get them in the shops, but I dare say they're in certain bookshops and things. So that's the new Doctor Who books. Hope you found this interesting, and will help you pick which ones you're going to collect. Let me know what you think of the video. Let me know what you think of the books. If you read them, leave a comment down below. Press that subscribe button there. And all that sort of stuff. I'll see you soon for another video. Until I do, keep checking the stuff.